You crouch in the dust at the edge of a circular sunken plaza. The stone under your palm is warm from the sun. All around you, the earth rises in low, step platforms like small, patiently arranged waves. The question that tugs at everything here is simple and stubborn. Who built this city? And why does it feel older than the old places? Older than most of the pyramids in Egypt. Older than the brick houses of Mesopotamia. Within these terraces and plazas is the beginning of a great human experiment, and the traces are quiet, deliberately so. If you want to know what life once felt like inside these walls, you have to listen to the stones, the charred plant remains, the bones of fish, and the patterns of wear on steps carved 5,000 years ago. The site is called Caral. It sits in the Supe Valley on the central coast of what we now call Peru. The dates are measured in charcoal and shell, and reed radiocarbon places the heart of the city, somewhere around 5,000 years ago, roughly between 3,000 and 1,800 BC, though the exact calendar numbers shift a little depending on the lab. That range is part of the mystery. Put plainly, this is one of the oldest urban centers in the Americas, a place where people built pyramidal mounds and planned plazas long before the Inca. It is a beginning that most school books barely mention, and part of the reason is that the usual signs of complexity, widespread pottery, written records, clear palace compounds, are largely absent. The silence makes the case both thrilling and maddening. The buildings are loud, the record is quiet. If you are trying to solve this like a detective, the first thing you do is gather physical evidence. Caral is a town of stones and soil, layers of human use piled on top of each other. From the air, the site looks like low hills dotted with trenches and terraces. On the ground, the architecture is the first clue, a series of large, terraced platform mounds grouped around broad, open plazas. The biggest mounds rise nearly 20 meters above the plaza floor. They are not single, pointed pyramids like the ones in Egypt. They are broad steps, like raised stages. Around them are houses, small, rectangular rooms built of stone and wattle and daub, with doorways low enough that you must duck. Sunken circular plazas sit between the platforms, sometimes with concentric benches carved into the earth, and the whole arrangement makes movement through the city feel ceremonial. You can imagine processions, or music, or the collective effort of hundreds of people moving stones, carrying reed bundles, and tamping earth. How do we know these platforms were built by organized groups rather than slow, accidental accumulation? The scale answers that. Some of the terraces are built with carefully cut stones faced and set into planned walls. The fills inside the platforms include layers of compacted earth, reed mats, and small hearths, which suggest deliberate construction episodes, work parties called and timed, and materials gathered from across the valley. The work required coordination, moving tons of rock, weaving and laying reed mats to stabilize fills, cutting terraces into the slope of the valley. That kind of labor tells you there was someone, or something, capable of organizing people at scale. But who that something was, and how it worked, is a question archaeologists have argued over. Early in the study of Caral, two broad ideas took shape. One was the maritime foundation hypothesis. Look at the coast. Its abundant fish and shellfish, the easy harvests of anchovy and sardine. Perhaps a relatively dense and reliable fishery could sustain a sizable population without the need for intensive agriculture. That idea was a surprise because the old model of complex society assumes agriculture first, cities second. The other idea was that people here were growing and processing cotton and other crops, irrigating fields in the river valleys, and that agriculture, especially cotton used to make nets, created a system that supported the city. Both ideas can be true at once. The detective work is in weighing bones and seeds. Walk with me to one of those low houses at the edge of the city, and imagine you are a fisherman coming in from the sea. This is the place for that second-person scene. You stand on the narrow reed craft that the modern name calls a cabalito de totora, a small, curved boat made from bundled reeds. The water is cold and green. You feel the slick rope in your hand and the net sagging with fish. During the long mornings, you float past breakers, pulling nets through the surf. You smell brine and fish oil, and your hands are rough and stained with anchovy scales. Back on shore, you drag the fish into the sun, spread them on woven mats, and begin the long process of drying and salting. The city needs your fish. They feed the people who build the platforms, and they leave a lot of bones in the middens that archaeologists will find 10 millennia later. Those middens, those ancient trash piles, are some of the clearest bits of evidence. When archaeologists sieve the soil, they find a lot of fish bones, particularly small, oily fish like anchoveta. The presence of large quantities of marine remains supports the idea that the sea was important. Isotope studies of human bones from the region show a significant marine component in diets, at least for parts of the population. But there are also large amounts of cotton seed and fragments of woven cloth, and we find evidence of agriculture upriver. Raised fields and canals where plants were irrigated, terraces where tubers or other crops could have been tended. The cotton is not incidental. Cotton here is like the oil in an industrial economy, a raw material that can be woven into nets and bags, traded inland for food, and used as an exchange good. That trade link, fish and cotton flowing out to the highlands in exchange for food staples grown there, is one of the things that made Caral both local and connected. The construction of the plazas and platforms gives another angle on daily life. These were not private pyramids. The low steps and broad terraces suggest communal performance spaces rather than sealed palaces. Think about a plaza as a stage. People gather, people watch, leaders speak, perhaps, or priests manipulate objects in front of a crowd. In the stratigraphy, the layers of occupation, archaeologists find signs of repeated, episodic use floors scraped clean, ash layers where fires once warmed crowds, concentrations of small offerings, and burned plant remains in central places. Those are ritual signatures. Some scholars say Caral was run by religious specialists who mobilized labor through ritual, rather than by a coercive state. Others see an emerging elite overseeing redistribution of goods and labor. Accounts vary, and part of the thrill is how both models are plausible with the same set of traces. One small piece of evidence that often goes unnoticed is the absence of another sort of item, pottery. In many early civilizations, pottery is a basic technology for storage and cooking. In Caral, pottery is virtually absent during the city's heyday. Instead, people used gourds, carved stone bowls, and woven containers sealed with resins. This absence complicates simple comparisons with Old World states. It means archaeologists have to rely on different lines of evidence: fiber impressions, plant remains, the wear on grinding stones, to see how people stored food, cooked, and ate. Let's step into a workshop now. You tuck into a low doorway of a house, and inside a woman works with spinning stick and spindle wool. The sound is the same across millennia: the click and turn of textile work, fibers sliding, breath short in the low, ceilinged room. Cotton hangs in piles, bleached by sun. Children sleep on woven mats, and a neighbor sits counting and knotting bundles used for carrying. What comes out of a textile workshop is not just cloth. It's rope, it's net. It is the literal binding of this place to its surroundings. A net holds fish, a textile package holds traded goods, a bag holds grain. The textiles are the connective tissue of the economy. Evidence of craft specialization appears in clusters of rooms with lots of spindle halls and small tools, and in concentrations of cut stone for building. It suggests that people did particular tasks in certain neighborhoods. The idea of specialization makes the city more like a small metropolis, with economic roles that go beyond immediate family needs. But specialization doesn't mean rigid top-to-bottom hierarchy. The picture archaeologists paint is complex and sometimes contradictory. Ceremonial centers with organized labor, households producing for both daily life and exchange, and leadership that, if it existed in a form we recognize, was subtle enough to leave few overt symbols of power. One of the most evocative parts of the site are the sunken circular plazas. They are deep, bowl-like depressions with stone benches circling the floor. You can sit in the center and speak, and your voice will carry. or stand at the lip and look down on the crowd. The design repeats across the valley, which suggests a shared ritual tradition. What did those rituals look like? We cannot know the words, the songs, the gestures, but there are indirect hints. In several contexts, archaeologists found small clusters of museum-worthy items, beads, carved stones, and sometimes marine shells. These are the artifacts of ritual, portable things that can be arranged and rearranged, offered and reclaimed. They are not palaces, hoarded treasures, they are instruments for performance. Caral is a study in trade and movement. Stones used in the construction, specific types not local to the valley, mark out the reach of an exchange network. Foods from the highlands are visible in plant remains washed down from upland fields. And there are hints of even longer, distance ties. Accounts vary on the presence of certain exotic shells or stones, but the consensus is that people here were not isolated. They moved seeds, fibers, and manufactured goods across a patchwork of ecology that included the cold, nutrient-rich sea and the hard, rain-fed highlands. Think of the valley as a node in a network, where sea and mountain met in human hands. If you stand on the highest terrace in the late afternoon, the light is a key part of daily life. The valley glows, and the sea draws a silver line on the horizon. From here you can see the mouth of the river, the narrow fields trailing inland like a green ribbon. The people who lived here tuned their lives to that geometry: tides in the morning, sun in the plaza at noon, the moving seasons for sowing and drying. That rhythm, sea, field, plaza, home, is how social life coalesced into the built form. So how did the city transform from vigorous urban center to the archaeological silence that greeted modern investigators? The collapse is as mysterious as the founding. Around 1800 BC or so, the monumental construction slows and then stops. The plazas are no longer maintained with the same intensity. Telltale changes appear in trash deposits and housing patterns, fewer large public deposits, more small household middens, decay in building maintenance. What caused this? Here the detective story splits into possible scenarios that interweave. One obvious suspect is the environment. The central Peruvian coast is arid. Freshwater comes from rivers fed by Andean rains and melting snow. Those sources can shift. Paleoclimate studies show episodes of stronger El Niño events, which periodically warm the ocean and disrupt the nutrient upwelling that supports fish populations. An El Niño can wash away fields, change river courses, and make coastal life precarious. At the same time, local environmental stress from overworking land and cutting wood for construction could exacerbate vulnerability. Salt intrusion into irrigation soils, a slow poison, undermines yields. Any of these changes could tip a delicate balance, and accounts vary on which was decisive. Another suspect is social reorganization. A city built on coordinated labor and ritual can appear spectacular while remaining vulnerable to internal change. If the rituals that once motivated communal labor lose meaning, or if leaders fail to renew legitimacy, the capacity to mobilize thousands for a build project vanishes. Or population movements. Perhaps people moved inland to more reliable rain-fed agriculture or to other emergent centers, could depopulate the valley. People do not always disappear because of catastrophes. Sometimes the economy or social incentives shift. A middle ground is likely environmental stress and social change together. Droughts and storms strain food supplies, leadership struggles to respond, trade networks fray, maintenance of irrigation and monuments lapses, and slowly the communal investment that built the platforms collapses into smaller, household-level strategies. The city does not explode in flames so much as dim. The plazas that once rang with voices empty out. That emptiness leaves us a different kind of puzzle. Why are the buildings so well preserved? One answer is nature. The arid climate and the durable stonework protected the architecture. Another answer is human. The site was abandoned in a way that left architecture intact, and nearby fields lie fallow, preserving footprints. The result is an archaeology of silence and stone. There is also a modern layer to the mystery, how we came to call this place a city at all. When archaeologist Ruth Shady began systematic work in the Supe Valley in the 1990s, She argued for the urban character of Caral, proposing it as the oldest known city in the Americas. That claim drew attention and debate, but it also spurred a wave of research. The label city matters because it frames how we imagine past social complexity. Does a place need walls, taxation, or written records to be a city? Caral presses us to broaden our definitions. Here the urban is expressed as planned public space, coordinated labor, and long-distance links, not as pottery styles or monumental tombs. As a detective, you also watch for the small, human pieces. Burial practices at Caral are not mass graves of rulers piled with gold. Instead, burials are often modest, placed in house floors or in small pits, sometimes with simple offerings. That tells you about social identity. People are remembered, but not in grand, individualized displays. It suggests a different kind of social order, communal memory, and ritual, rather than exalted personal status. Accounts vary on the degree to which inequality existed in daily life. There is evidence of differences in diet and access to marine protein in skeletal remains, pointing to social differentiation, but it is more muted than the palatial inequalities of later Andean states. We are still learning how people organized the practicalities of living here. How did children pick up skills? How did women and men divide work? We can see some gendered patterns. For example, textile tools appear in certain contexts, and burials sometimes include objects associated with specific tasks. But interpretations remain tentative. Archaeology is humane but not omniscient. There are gaps that will never be filled without written words left behind. The silence is meaningful. It makes each recovered spindle whole, every charred cotton seed, and each carved stone more precious, because they are fragments of someone's lived day. Bringing this back to the daily picture a morning in Caral. Smoke spirals from low hearths. The plaza is pale as people move from house to workshop. Some head to fields upriver with baskets and ropes. Fishers put out in reed boats. The children run in the alleyways between stone-lined foundations. Someone brings a small stone offering to the sunken plaza and leaves it on the bench. A woman tightens a net knot and breathes in the salt air. An elder addresses a gathered crowd about the timing of a building project. There is music somewhere, a rhythm of simple percussion, perhaps the tapping of wood against stone. And food becomes a focus of exchange and social life: fish dried in the sun, plant foods cooked in heated stones, gourds filled with sauces. The senses here are sharp: salt in the air, soil underfoot, the scratch of fibers, the taste of sun, dried anchovy. The silence of Caral in the record is partly why the site carries a particular kind of power. It demands imagination disciplined by evidence. You can't fill every blank, but you can test hypotheses. Archaeologists have used a spectrum of methods: radiocarbon dating, microbotanical analysis that reads photoliths and starch grains, isotopic analysis of bones to reconstruct diets, and careful mapping of architecture to assemble a coherent, if partial, story. Each method is a tool in the detective kit. When multiple lines point the same way, confidence grows. One of the most moving moments in the history of Caral's study came not from a grand discovery, but from a small one. Picture yourself decades from now slipping a brush over a compacted floor and exposing a quiet thing. A child's footprint fossilized in a thin smear of clay on a house floor. It is minute, but suddenly you are in the room with that child. Archaeology at its best produces that shock. A tiny human detail cuts through the distance of millennia and makes the past immediate. There are still hard arguments in the literature. Some researchers press the maritime hypothesis hard, arguing that the sea alone could sustain a dense, urban life. Others insist agriculture and irrigation were fundamental. A third camp blends both, making the point that coastal life and field agriculture were complementary. There are also debates about the nature of leadership and the degree of inequality. None of these debates are mere academic hair-splitting. How we place Caral in a story of human social evolution affects how we think about the development of cities worldwide. Whether cities must be tied to grain agriculture, or whether other resource bases can support complex social life. Modernity adds another layer. For much of the 20th century, These mounds were known to local people and were sometimes plundered for stone or tweaked by farmers. When archaeologists began serious excavation, they had to rescue context from damage. That task is ongoing. Preservation in a desert environment still requires active work. The site is now protected and recognized, but the act of reconstruction, deciding which floors to expose, which walls to rebuild, stands for visitors. Itself shapes how future people will understand Caral. The detective story is never neutral once we begin to curate evidence for public storytelling. And then comes the question that turns my attention every time: what else was lost? We can piece together diets, buildings, the rough outlines of economy. But the languages they spoke, the myths they told in those sunken plazas, the songs that accompanied the tightening of a net, the jokes of children, those are gone in human tongues. The physical record cannot hold everything. There may have been ritual practices encoded in ephemeral materials, textiles that rotted, wood that was burned, dyes that faded, that left no trace. Perhaps entire repertoires of social action were performed in bodies and songs and were never written down. That sense of loss is not a failure of archaeology, it is the human reality of time. Even so, what remains is no small thing. The stones stand like sentences of a text. The middens are grammar. The charcoal dates are punctuation. When these pieces come together, we can reconstruct a working model of daily life, people rooted in the valley and the sea, weaving nets and building platforms, ritually gathering in plazas, exchanging with the highlands, and responding to environmental pressures that eventually reshaped their world. It is the story of a human city that did not follow the script of palace, and pottery that dominates our mental map of early civilizations. It is its own solution to the problem of living well in a difficult landscape. And the last image I want you to carry is simple. Go back in your mind to the plaza at dusk. The air is cool. A breeze brushes dust from the terraces, and it carries the faint, briny smell of the sea. Against a low stone bench, a loose thread of cotton catches the light. A single fiber that once belonged to a net, a garment, or a child's belt. It flutters and then rests, held briefly against the hard architecture of the city. Even after 5,000 years, that thread connects you, in a direct, almost ridiculous way, to a hand that twisted it. We will never hear that hand speak. We will never learn the tunes hummed as it worked. But the thread is proof of touch, of routine, of domestic life. The biggest truths of Caral are in these small things: labor organized not just to feed but to connect. An economy that spanned sea and mountain. Plazas that demanded an audience. And a slow, quietly human unraveling that left behind a city of stones and questions. What else, I want to ask finally, was tied to that single frayed fiber? A knowledge, a craft, a song that the earth took and the stones kept silent.